Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Welcome to the Sarah Stevenson Tuesday Morning Forum. I am Winston Robinson, facilitator amongst other facilitators, Laura McCletty, Carlenia Ivory Canty, Jackie Edwards Walton, Nathalie McElrath, Mary Johnson, our website editor, Steve Johnston, and our chaplain, Ms. Sharitha Sherrill. Our forum runs from 8:30 to 9:45 a.m., at which time we will pause for announcements from our audience. Announcements also can be sent to Steve Johnson at sjohnston with a T at tuesdaymorningforum.org. We always begin with a prayer from our chaplain, Ms. Sharitha Sherrill. We'll do that now.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Bow your heads and pray with me, please. Dear Heavenly Father, we're thankful for so much this morning. We're thankful for being able to experience Founders Day for a lot of our fraternities and sororities. We're thankful for so much, seeing another January 2023, celebrating Martin Luther King's birthday. He would have been 94 Sunday. For a continuous forum, transmit information to our community for their benefits and our benefits. Bless us today, dear Father. Remember the children everywhere and every day. Bless this nation, bless our state, bless our city, our neighborhoods, our homes. It's in your Son Jesus' name I pray. Let us say together, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Ms. Sherrill. Do we have any first timers? Would you mind please standing and announce who you are and the organization you represent?
Yeah, thank you. Janice Robinson. I am the North Carolina Director for an organization called Red, Wine, and Blue. We are a 501c3/C4 organization mobilizing the diversity of suburban women to take part in this multiracial coalition for justice. And I'm a resident of Valentine for the last 12 years, but I'm here in Charlotte. Glad to be here.
Good to have you. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Our guest today is the incredible Ms. Kristie Puckett-Williams, representing the ACLU, but more importantly, the streets. Again, if you don't know Ms. Puckett-Williams, literally one of the most compelling stories of resilience you will ever hear in your entire life. I've been fascinated with her story since just seeing her lives on Facebook. And that's how I come to know her. And since then, again, it's been a nonstop show of appreciation for her activism. So thank you, Ms. Puckett, for joining us. Following the presentation, we will take questions from the audience. Please raise your hands, and I will call on you in the order in which your hand is acknowledged. Questions should be no longer than 30 seconds. Once a question receives a response, there are no counters. We do not debate. Without further ado,
Thank you.
Kristie Puckett-Williams.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I am a native Charlottean. I was born at Charlotte Memorial Hospital and attended and graduated from Charlotte Mecklenburg schools. And working for the ACLU of North Carolina is an honor to work at the ACLU of North Carolina. Before we get started with my presentation, if you're not familiar with the ACLU of North Carolina, I'm going to go through a brief overview of what we work on and how we work. So at the ACLU of North Carolina, our theory of change is that if we put our values into action, it shapes what our work looks like. We use a multi-pronged approach, which is what we call integrated advocacy, where we have a policy and advocacy team, the litigation team, our communications team. We mobilize our field. We provide education and technical assistance to communities and groups across the state. And we also do civil rights and civil liberties rapid response, which is what a lot of people know me from. Protests erupt. The ACLU of North Carolina is oftentimes one of the first groups on the scene when police brutality or any type of civil unrest develops. And so we provide a variety of resources to folks such as legal observing. We coordinate bailouts. We stand in solidarity. We get arrested ourselves, got a trial coming up soon in Elizabeth City, and things of that nature. And we do all of that to strengthen our organization because we know with a strong ACLU, with a strong civic and civil liberties and civic engagement opportunities, when we do that, when we come into the communities, we really do empower ourselves and the communities to operate in transformational ways. And what we want is transformational change. We believe that we will use our focus on these different issue areas: voting rights, racial justice, the transformation of the criminal legal system, reproductive justice, LGBTQIA equality, and immigrants' rights. We're going to create those legal protections, progressive policies, and we're going to shift social norms so that people in North Carolina who have been historically underserved and marginalized will begin to experience a more just North Carolina, so that ultimately we become a model for the South with not just protected and expanded civil rights and civil liberties, but where we move closer to racial justice and abolition of the carceral state. And so that's a pretty bold vision, abolition of the carceral state. And we're going to go through what the carceral state means so that we're all operating from a place of understanding. In her 2006 book entitled The Prisons and the Gallows, The Politics of Mass Incarceration, Marie Gottschalk noted that a tenacious carceral state has sprouted in the shadows of mass imprisonment and has been extending its reach far beyond the prison gate. It includes not only this country's vast array of jails and prisons, but also the far-reaching and growing penal punishments and controls that lie in the never land between the prison gate and full citizenship, as it sunders, tears apart families and communities and radically reworks conceptions of democracy, rights, and citizenship. The carceral state poses a formidable political and social challenge. So the carceral state, y'all, is not just the jails and the prisons. The carceral state is the lack of bodily autonomy that we as Black, brown, and poor people experience in this state. North Carolina's model carceral state pursues and maintains the goals and values of systemic racism, familial separation, authoritarianism, unrestrained capitalism, and limited citizenship. And if you look at North Carolina policymakers and law enforcement, they criminalize and seek to eradicate a range of activities, behaviors, conditions, characteristics, preferences, relationships, and identities. The carceral state exercises control over people's bodies and community resources to control the most marginalized, especially Black, brown, and poor people. So today we're going to talk about reproductive justice, because reproductive justice is something that we saw fall under attack last year with the fall of Roe versus Wade. What is reproductive justice? Sister Song defines reproductive justice as the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, have children, not have children, and parent the children we have in safe and sustainable communities. Reproductive justice is a human right. It's not just about the right, but it's also about access, not choice. Mainstream movements have focused on keeping abortion legal as an individual choice. That is necessary, but that's not enough. Even when abortion is legal, many women of color cannot afford it or cannot travel hundreds of miles to the nearest clinic. There is no choice when there is no access. And it's not just about abortion. Abortion access is critical, but Black women and other marginalized women also have difficulty accessing contraception, comprehensive sex education, sexually transmitted infection prevention and care, alternative birth options, adequate prenatal and pregnancy care, domestic violence assistance, adequate wages to support our families, safe homes, and so much more. And Dr. Martin Luther King said, of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane. So let me tell you a little bit about me and how I came into this work at the ACLU of North Carolina. When I was 21 years old, I was involved in a really violent relationship and experienced a lot of domestic violence and sexual violence. And I found myself in Gary McFadden's jail right up there on 4th Street as a victim of violence, because the police would come to my house and say, we're tired of y'all fighting. Maybe if we take you to jail, the fighting will stop. And so sometimes my boyfriend would get arrested, and sometimes I would get arrested. And we entered into a vicious cycle where the violence was never really addressed, just the behaviors, just the separation, not the underlying issues that might have contributed to that violence, but just separation. And so, of course, we entered again into this violent cycle of domestic violence, which eventually led to a violent cycle of addiction. And I found myself addicted to crack cocaine and found myself in and out of that jail as a result of my mental health, substance abuse, and victimhood being criminalized rather than treated. We know that oftentimes Black women, poor women, brown women do not receive the resources that are readily available in community when they experience violence. And so as a result of that, going back and forth to jail, I found myself in jail, and back in 2008, I was pregnant. I received no prenatal care the entire time that I was there. I took a guilty plea just to get out. And 5 days later, I had a set of newborn twins who were born 6 weeks early due to the lack of care that I had received. I had no idea I was having twins, and I found out that day. They stayed in the NICU for 21 days, and they were able to come home with me. Myself on intense probation. Thank you to Spencer Merriweather. Shout out to Spencer Merriweather. I was able to stay home. And it's a shout out because I was able to stay home and raise my children as opposed to be in prison. And that was something that had not really been done before for people in my situation. I had really serious charges and a lot of them. And so we were really able to work a deal out to where I was able to remain in my children's lives, remain in community. But I decided that what had happened to me was so gross and so inhumane that no one should ever experience a pregnancy while incarcerated and receiving no care. When I say no care, I never saw a doctor. I had no idea I was having twins. I had no idea how far along I was. I had no idea what was going on. I did not know. So, how is this possible? In this day and age, you might ask yourself. It requires that we go back to an uncomfortable time in our history in this country where Indigenous people were displaced and Black people were enslaved. So to illustrate the importance of reproductive justice, we have to look at the treatment of enslaved women according to Dorothy Roberts in her book, Killing the Black Body. She says every indignity that comes from the denial of reproductive autonomy can be found in an enslaved woman's life. The harms of treating a uterus as a procreative vessel, of policies that pit a mother's welfare against that of her unborn fetus, and of government attempts to manipulate a woman's childbearing decisions through threats and bribes. Studying this control of enslaved women not only discloses the origins of Black people's subjugation in America, it also bears witness to the horrible denial of reproductive freedom. America has always viewed unregulated Black reproduction as dangerous. I'm gonna repeat that. America has always viewed unregulated Black reproduction as dangerous. A persistent objective of American social policy has been to monitor and restrain Black motherhood because it has always thought that Black mothers transfer a deviant lifestyle to their children, resulting in poverty, delinquency, and despair. The degradation of Black mothers is just one stereotype in a complex set that denies Black people's humanity to legitimize white supremacy. This is the degradation of Black mothers in this country, though, started before there was a country and before they ever reached the shores. Because kidnapped Africans en route to the Americas were closely examined by the ship's surgeon to cut losses immediately by throwing those deemed unhealthy overboard. Soundness for women was often tied to sexual attractiveness and reproductive ability. Those who were pregnant when kidnapped were shackled, chained to others, and routinely raped by sailors because they were property. They had no social or legal protections. This is best demonstrated by our founding fathers, who imbued a set of attributes on Black folks that made them unfit for citizenship, thus solving this contradiction between liberty and slavery. Because you can't write the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, while simultaneously owning people, unless you have to solve this contradiction between who is a person and who has rights and who does not have rights. And in this country, historically, we know that Black people do not have rights. And the person who wrote the Declaration of Independence, the third president of the United States and an enslaver, Thomas Jefferson, declared, "I consider a slave woman who breeds once every 2 years as profitable as the best worker on the farm." And we know how many children he had with the child slave Sally Hemings. So from 1750 to 1865, we can see why 1 in 5 Black women of childbearing age, meaning between the ages of 15 and 44, gave birth. Girls were forced into sexual relationships with other enslaved men and slave owners at unhealthy, early age, ravaging their young bodies with sexually transmitted infections. Now, we're going to move the conversation into modern day, what's happening in the prisons around pregnant women and girls. Because what you will see is there is a thread between the treatment of enslaved women and the treatment of pregnant women in prisons today. Women in prison are often considered unworthy of motherhood, as prison policy, public discourse, and public policy painfully demonstrate. Prison policies undermine parent-child relationships by limiting visiting hours, charging exorbitant rates for collect phone calls, imprisoning people far from home. In many states, the one prison for women is in a rural area, even though most of the women come from the cities. And some departments of corrections send women to serve their time in other states. For example, Hawaii sends women all the way to Kentucky to serve their time. It's impossible to maintain a relationship with your child in Hawaii and Kentucky. And while prisons and jails are designed by and for men, incarceration rates for women are on the rise. Since the 1980s, incarceration rates for women have increased by over 800%. Yet people incarcerated in women's facilities, especially pregnant people, are ignored with few legal protections or policies that address their special needs, particularly around pregnancy and reproductive care. And in many cases, there are more legal protections and oversights concerning the protection of captive wild animals and the care and handling of farm animals than there are for incarcerated pregnant people in these here United States. For example, in Colorado, a pregnant pig cannot be confined to a cage for more than 12 hours a day. But in most states, no such protections exist for pregnant people. And in fact, pregnant people are oftentimes put into what is called safekeeping, which is solitary confinement-like conditions where they are under lock and key 23.5 hours a day in a 6 by 7 foot cell, only allowed out for 30 minutes rec time. So the documentation of pregnancies and pregnancy care is sparse, sometimes anecdotal, and rarely generalizable on a national level. The most recent data from the Bureau of Justice was collected more than 15 years ago. In 2002, the Bureau of Justice found that 5% of women in local jails were pregnant when admitted. For prisons, they reported that 4% of women in state prisons, of 3% of women in federal prisons were pregnant upon admission. But the government has not released any further national data since. In a recent study of 22 U.S. state prison systems and all U.S. federal prison systems, published in the American Journal of Public Health, found a similar pregnancy rate. Roughly 3.8% of the women in their sample were pregnant when they entered prisons. And while the rate of pregnancy has remained stable since the early 2000s, the additional 10,000 plus women in prison since then indicates that the number of women who are incarcerated while pregnant has grown too. So as long as the mass incarceration of women endures, incarcerated pregnancies will continue to rise. And most states lack important policies on prenatal care. The jails and prisons are required to provide prenatal care under the 8th Amendment to the Constitution, but no detailed federal standards have been set to ensure that women are actually receiving the care they need. The National Commission on Correctional Health has published a set of standards for the treatment of pregnant women in prison, such as appropriate medical exams as a component of prenatal care, specialized treatment for women with substance use disorders, and limiting the use of restraints through the course of pregnancy. But the data that has been obtained shows that the lack of codified protocols for the care of pregnant women in state prisons is widespread. And most women are not getting even the most basic needs. And this helps to explain that a survey that found that only half of pregnant women in prison reported receiving some form of prenatal care while incarcerated. Pregnant women are particularly vulnerable to pregnancy complications related to substance use disorders, poor nutrition, sexually transmitted infections, because they often come from traumatic social and economic environments that exacerbate those risk factors. So remember, I came from a very traumatic social and economic environment when I came into the jail setting pregnant. So my pregnancy was high risk because of the trauma, because of the economic instability that I faced, but also because of the substance use. And I was pregnant with twins, which just in itself is a high-risk pregnancy. But we didn't know that. I required special treatment, but I did not get that special treatment to ensure that my children were born in good health. So In August of 2019, there was a video that came out that some of you all might have seen. It went viral, where 26-year-old Diana Sanchez was alerting the Denver County jail deputies and medical staff that she was in labor. No one came to her aid, and she was forced to give birth just hours alone in her cell without any medical aid or assistance. So she was in her cell laboring for hours without any medical assistance or any care. Her experience is not isolated, as a number of reports by women in prisons and jails across the country have revealed a similar disregard for pregnant women's basic needs. The use of restraints, often referred to as shackling, has serious health impacts on pregnant women. According to the American College of OBGYNs, shackling exacerbates pain, it inhibits diagnosis of complications, limits movement during the birthing process. 12 states still provide no policy limiting restraints on women during pregnancy. Incarcerated women require highly specific care in order to protect against adverse pregnancy outcomes. Over 20% of prison pregnancies result in miscarriages, and preterm birth rates exceed the national average. The variability of these outcomes speaks to the inconsistent medical care afforded women in prisons across the country and suggests that more universal policy standards could make pregnancy outcomes more equitable. In an April 2019 tour of a state prison in Arizona, they found that pregnant or recently pregnant women universally reported receiving inadequate nutrition during their pregnancies. Diets were reported to be largely lacking in fruit and vegetables, and the only additional food pregnant women received was an extra peanut butter sandwich and a carton of milk per day. I can confirm I would have starved in the Mecklenburg County Jail if it had not been for the commissary, which means people, family, and friends putting money on my account so that I could purchase food. But let me tell you what I was purchasing. Snickers, cakes, cookies, ramen noodles, because that was really all that was available. But that junk supplemented my diet enough to where I did not starve, because you only get about 1,300 or 1,400 calories the entire day in a carceral setting. And the American Public Health Association cites unbalanced and inadequate diets as risk factors for preterm birth, birth defects, and other developmental problems in early childhood. And we just saw that preterm birth is exponentially higher in women who are incarcerated while pregnant. And we know that these inadequate and unbalanced diets pose a formidable threat. Studies in 31 states found that the states that lack policies on nutrition, no guidelines existed beyond phrasing such as adequate or appropriate. What does that mean? What is adequate? What is adequate to you may be different for someone else. So it was very vague, and except for California. California people get to get 2 extra 8-ounce cartons of milk a day. I know that don't sound like a lot, but it really is, y'all. 2 extra servings of fresh fruit, 2 extra servings of fresh vegetables daily, with extra allowance for additional nutrients ordered by a physician. It is very detailed about what you get. Here in the Mecklenburg County Jail, you get fruit, you might get some apples or an orange, but you don't get any fresh vegetables inside of the Mecklenburg County Jail. So, up until now, we've talked about prisons, but there are also jails, and jails are different than prisons in that the sheriff, the elected sheriff, runs a jail, and each jail can have its own policy. And so the policies are often inaccessible, incomplete, making it hard to gauge the treatment of pregnant people in jail. Policy gaps make it harder for the jail staff to provide the adequate care for pregnant women. So this is when they don't have an adequate policy. That is why someone like me can slip through the cracks and not receive any prenatal care despite being there for the entire pregnancy. So if it's not in the policy, more than likely it won't get done. And even if it is in the policy, it still may or may not get done. So given the higher pregnancy rate among women admitted to jails and a large share of women held in jails, things like Diana Sanchez's and my experience are regular occurrences in the carceral state. Diana Sanchez laboring and having that baby in that cell is not a one-off. That's something that regularly occurs. Me not receiving prenatal care the entire time, no prenatal care, never seeing a doctor, never leaving the jail, is not a one-off. That is a regular occurrence. And it's because of the policies that are in place, or we could say are not in place. So, North Carolina. Public records show that In 2018, there were 256 pregnant people incarcerated at the North Carolina Correctional Institute for Women, and that 66 of them were pretrial detainees who have been transferred to the prison as safekeepers. So basically, if you live in a poor county, not Mecklenburg County, but if you live, say, in Rutherford County, and the sheriff is like, I don't even have space for you over here. Matter of fact, I don't even have a doctor to come over here. I'm going to send you to Raleigh. Even though you're pretrial, have not been convicted of anything, I'm going to send you to the prison in Raleigh so that you can receive the care. That's where you're placed into safekeeping. And again, safekeeping is the practice of putting pregnant people inside of solitary confinement conditions. So 23 and a half hour a day lockdown, 3 showers a week. Yeah, they have only non-contact visits when they are in safekeeping, and they are generally not permitted to eat meals or engage in any programming outside of their cells. Those are no exceptions are made for pregnant people. Again, they get to shower 3 times a week, and they get 1 hour of exercise. So they're on 23 hour a day lockdown, not 23 and a half. So we've seen an 18% increase of women jailed in North Carolina. We see a 5% time increase from 1978 to 2015, a 7% increase from 2018 to 2019. And as of this Monday, yesterday, Dr. King's birthday, 2,296 women were incarcerated in North Carolina prisons. And based on national statistics, that would translate into roughly 91 pregnant women inside of North Carolina prisons right now. So this is what we didn't know. We didn't know any of the policies. We didn't know any outcomes. We didn't know anything about prenatal care, nutrition, or accommodations in the 100 county jails. And so what we did at the ACLU of North Carolina was we worked on a bill called Dignity for Incarcerated Pregnant Women, also known as House Bill 608. And this kind of goes through how a bill becomes a law. Basically, we're just gonna go through quick civics real quick. So, got a bill idea, you introduce it in either chamber. There's a Senate and a House. Senate has 50 members, the House in North Carolina has 120 members, and you introduce it in either chamber. It has to go through all these committees. I mean, there's so many committees, y'all. So many ways for your bill to not make it to the finish line. I can't even tell you how many. It's like 29 attempts to try to get it to the finish line. So you introduce it into either chamber, has to go through so many committees. It has to pass through each committee before it goes to the next committee. And then it goes to the vote on the floor. It has to have several votes on the floor. Then once it gets to those several votes on the floor, it has to cross over to the other chamber and do the same thing. Oof. Has to be introduced, has to go through all of the committees, has to go through several votes. And then once that happens, then it has to go to concurrence, which means that if there were any changes made in the Senate or in the House, then they have to make a bill that concurs where they bring all those changes and they agree, both chambers agree on the final version of the bill. And if that happens, then it goes to the vote onto the floor. And then if it's voted in, the governor either signs it or vetoes it. And we were able to, after many, many years, people have been working to get this anti-shackling bill passed. And in 2021, myself and my colleagues were able to get that bill across the finish lines. Sometimes we have press conferences during the process to get public support for what we're trying to do. This is important because this person right here, I had to stand beside him. His name is Terry Johnson. He is the most racist sheriff in North Carolina. And he was a supporter of the bill, and the Sheriff's Association was being petty by putting him beside me because the ACLU has sued him for many occasions for his racism. And we fought the North Carolina Sheriff's Association and won because they told us in January of 2021 that there was not a snowball's chance in hell that this bill would get passed. And we told him, we'll see you on the floor. And we got it passed. And he had to stand there, he had to smile, he had to grin, he had to bear it. So did I. But he had to grin, he had to bear it. And so that was a good day. So what does House Bill 608 do, y'all? Just so y'all know. It limits the use of restraints from the second trimester until 6 weeks postpartum, meaning that you cannot be shackled. It limits the body cavity searches, meaning no more squatting and coughing if you are a pregnant woman, because yes, they still engage in body cavity searches on pregnant folks. We standardize the nutritional content and access to food and dietary supplements. We provided access to menstrual products. We limited housing restrictions and bed assignments, meaning you can't just arbitrarily place folks in solitary-like conditions. We allowed a bonding period for the mother and the baby while in the hospital. We directed DPS to place new parents within 250 miles of the child where feasible, and we expanded existing visitation guidelines. We made sure that they would be provided educational materials to pregnant folks in the carceral settings related to pregnancy and parenting. We made sure that that training for employees was mandated to cover critical topics for providing appropriate care for this population. But more importantly, we didn't just do this for all the prisons. We made sure that this happened in all 100 counties in North Carolina. So a pregnant woman in rural North Carolina has the same opportunities to be afforded the same level of care as women in the most affluent parts of the state. So in conclusion, at the ACLU of North Carolina, we work on civil rights and civil liberties. It's not just to advance voting rights and enhance people's experience of the criminal legal system. Our work and our efforts must include reproductive freedom. Our work must include fighting for full bodily autonomy of all people, but especially incarcerated substance-using mothers. And thank you.
Right, man, thank you so much, Chris. That was a brilliant presentation. If we have any questions, I'm actually use a point of privilege to ask my question first.
Okay.
And I kind of know the answer already, but if you would, along with pregnancy comes a lot of issues in the postpartum world. Are there any measures that you know of that before House Bill 608 that prisons and jails would respond to with postpartum, the mental side and the physical side?
No, they didn't. They didn't do a lot of things for postpartum. And currently one of the things that we're fighting with DPS, well, the Department of Adult Correction right now, is around the treatment of substance use disorders. So if you are pregnant and have an opioid disorder and you receive a prescription medication, which is made either Suboxone or whatever medicine your doctor prescribes for you to help with the withdrawals and to help, through the detox process. Once you have the baby in North Carolina, that treatment stops immediately, which is really dangerous. It makes mothers more at risk, not just for relapse, but for death. People can die from withdrawals. And so, postpartum, your baby is gone, right? So it's one thing to have postpartum and you're looking at that little baby, holding that baby, right? Smelling that baby. It's a whole nother thing for that baby to be with maybe your family, maybe foster care and with strangers. And if you are substance addicted and now you have that, no longer have the medication to help you with those physical withdrawals, we see people really, really be depressed, harm themselves, increased infractions, not really invested in their own recovery or rehabilitation anymore. We say that prisons are supposed to be rehabilitative, but we don't see them rehabilitate really anyone. What we see is punishment and control, not so much care. And so I would say that postpartum is probably one of the most depressing. That's why it was so important for me to get out. My attorney, shout out to the Mecklenburg County Public Defender's Office. We've talked about public defenders, but they worked me out a good deal. And his name was Jason St. Aubin. And basically he came to me the day before I took this plea deal. He said, Kristie, what are you going to do? They offered me this plea. And I was like, I didn't do anything. I mean, they really don't have any evidence. And he agreed, they don't have any evidence. But, my bond was $167,000. It was really high. And he was like, if you take it to trial, I have no idea when your trial is going to occur. It could be a year from now. Who's going to take care of your kid? And then he was like, what would we do if you get shackled? If you're shackled, if you have the baby while incarcerated, you'll be shackled. And so that really was pressing on me. And then he also told me the baby would be separated from me pretty much immediately after birth. So that was a huge weight on my mind. It was important for me not to experience postpartum while incarcerated. So I took a guilty plea. But people in prison don't even have that choice. They have already been convicted. They have to stay their times. Some of my friends describe knowing that they've been convicted and having to wean their baby. So they know they got to go turn themselves in. They're breastfeeding their baby and they're trying to wean the baby, quickly breastfeed, but also quickly break that bond because they know they have to go turn themselves in. So it's really depressing.
We got a question from Mr. Gary Emanuel, the gentleman.
Good morning, Queen.
Good morning.
First, I'd like to commend you on your success.
Thank you.
As a human being, as a Black woman.
Thank you.
I have twins myself, and 3 months premature. They graduated college. Well,
Good.
Dr. Frances Cresswell said, may she rest in peace. She said, racism is a universal system. I commend you and your organization on all your efforts to fight that. Through my life and my history, I feel that laws being legally allowing white supremacy. So again, I commend you on your efforts. My question is, it doesn't have anything to do with prisons, but if you apply within a government entity for assistance that's being regulated by the government, I think I know the answer, but I wanted to get it from you. Denying a person due process is against one's constitutional right. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'd like to speak on that with you when this is over.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
No problem. And there's only certain, we have to talk about protected classes really quick. You know, race is a protected class, and gender is a protected class, religion is a protected class, but certain identities are not protected. And so depending on what your identity is, you may or may not have protections under the law. Like I'm a formerly incarcerated, I'm a habitual felon. I have no protections under the law, child. So, you know, it just depends. I just don't. Like, I'm not even third class citizen. I'm fourth, fifth, sixth class citizen. And so it just depends on the identity that whether it's protected or not, but I'm happy to discuss that with you.
You have a question for Ms. McClellan?
Yes, and thanks again for being here.
Yes, ma'am.
This is really, really good opportunity for me to learn about what in jail. But my question to you is, in Raleigh, in North Carolina, who were the legislators that assisted you and worked closely with you to get this bill passed?
Yes, ma'am. So the sponsors of the bill were Senator Amy Gailey. We had Representatives Ashton Clemens out of the Guilford County area. And then we had a Republican. You have to have Republican sponsorship in North Carolina. You're not going to get a bill passed that doesn't have strong Republican sponsorship. So we had Dr. Kristen Baker out of Cabarrus County. That was also a strong supporter of the bill.
Anyone from Mecklenburg?
No, ma'am.
With it, Ms. Roberts?
Yeah, thank you, Kristie.
Yes,
This
ma'am.
is very enlightening, and thank you for the work that you all are doing.
Thank you.
And well, two quick questions.
Okay.
First of all, did you say the bill passed, was it in 2020?
2021. It went into effect in December of 2021. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Now that the bill is passed, it's the law and so forth, what work does the ACLU do some work to help, first of all, getting the information out? Because a lot of times people don't know that they have these new rights and so forth. So in terms of what work do you all do, and in that, how can we help?
Yeah.
You know, to get the word out to women that they, first of all, they have this right. Second thing is, does the ACLU do any work to kind of help hold the entities accountable to make sure that they are actually providing these protections and services to these women?
Yes, ma'am. So yes to both your questions. So we that's the phase we're in right now. Matter of fact, is accountability phase.
Okay.
Getting information from government systems is very difficult. They like to delay, deny, minimize, obfuscate, and do everything they can to not be held accountable. I used to teach domestic violence classes, and the behaviors on the power and control wheel that abusive partners might exhibit, the government exhibits towards us all the time. We don't have the ability oftentimes to get a straight answer. So what we have to do is trust the incarcerated people, what they tell us. They tell us that they are still being shackled. But what we found is that's not happening so much at the prison level, but it's UNC Chapel Hill, child, their hospital. You know, UNC system is, anyway. So the UNC Chapel Hill Hospital has, the police have their own policy. So Chapel Hill police have their own, UNC Chapel Hill University police have their own hospital policy, which is if you are coming from a carceral facility, you must be shackled in that facility for the safety of their employees. And so we are working with them to help them understand that they are breaking state law, and to help work with them to get more into alignment with the law. But that's one of the challenges, yes. And then getting the information out is we do things like this. We go across the state speaking to folks. It's really difficult for us to get inside sometimes of the prisons. I've been to several men's prisons, but for some reason, they don't want us in that women's prison. I don't know what's really going on, but we get to see the men's prison. I was on a recent tour of a men's prison and got to talk to people. But yeah, getting information inside can be difficult. There's a new way of communicating with people who are incarcerated. So you can't write letters anymore. You can write a letter, but it doesn't get, your handwritten letter doesn't get to them anymore. It has to go to a third party that then scans your letter in and prints your letter out to the person. And so your information, depending on what you're saying in that letter, may or may not get to the person. And so if we try to do I can't do mass mailings inside of the prison. They'll deny a mass mailing. So it really would take volunteers handwriting letters to say this is a thing. But you would be surprised, y'all. People who are incarcerated call me all the time and know more about what's going on sometimes in legislation I do. And I'm sitting in the building. I'm like, what are you talking about? No, they just introduced this bill, Kristie. I'm telling you, they just introduced it. I'm like, what? No, they did. I ain't seen that. Sure enough, they have time. They read newspapers. They have tablets now. They are up on it. And so they have oftentimes much more information in real time than what I might have.
All right, we got a question from the internet.
Okay.
What would you say to your younger self based on where you are and your level of wisdom now?
Mm-hmm.
And how are your children?
I would say keep going. That it doesn't end. Because there were lots of days that I prayed for it to end. And I'm not getting emotional because I'm sad, because I'm very grateful for where I am. There's a lot of people who didn't make it. I used to be up and down West Boulevard, Beattysport Road, any little hood, smoking crack, up and down the street, looking crazy, Wilmore, all of the neighborhoods. And to be, seriously, I'm for Expo. And so I hold my homes. And so like, when I think about all the people who didn't make it, when I think about all the people I left behind the wall, all the people who I continue to fight for today, I am truly blessed. Like I listened to the Ty Tippett song on the way over here, I want it all back. And if the devil had known what the storm was gonna be, what I would be after the storm, he probably would have messed with me, right? And so that's the lyric from the song. So I really am blessed. And my children are doing well. I have an older son who's 22 who grew up with me. I had him at 21 years old. Whatever struggle I had, he had. And today, he's an amazing young man, works for Arkansas State University, doing his thing. He's a creative. I'm very proud of him. The twins go to Charlotte Lab School, are going into high school next year. Very bright, intelligent, good children. I don't know how I got so lucky and so blessed to have such amazing children because, you know, I'm a trip. And for real, and my kids is all right. And so I just know that, you know, I'm doing something right, you know. And I also know that I wouldn't change anything. I wouldn't, because I would not have the perspective that I have today. I have a lot of privilege today, but I come from a place of extreme humility because I remember what it was like to walk down the street at 4 o'clock in the morning looking crazy. I remember what it was like walking down Statesville Avenue looking crazy at 4. I see people walking now and remember getting high with those people. And so it doesn't make me feel that I'm better than them. It makes me feel that I should be doing more for them. And so my life is a life of service. So it's a blessed life today, I must say.
We got Chris and we got June.
Okay.
How can I get more involved? Like if I wanted to volunteer, like
Sure.
And how? Excuse me if you're repeating yourself.
No.
I came in late. How did you get started? What was your introduction?
This work?
Just wanted to be a child.
Yeah, well, so my own experience of being forgotten. You know, I was a victim of domestic violence. I was a substance user, crackhead, AKA, right? And so when you are what people deem to be unworthy, you really see the good and the bad of mankind, right? Like and so for me, knowing that we are all like kind of like one decision away,
Right.
from life happening, and it can come at you pretty fast. You know, that I knew that what people had prescribed for me or thought about me, that wasn't true. And that I had an opportunity, because I don't look like what I've been through, to advocate for anybody who's been through what I've been through. Because I know that my proximity, my father was white, my proximity to whiteness, light skin, have loosely curled hair, the propensity for me to be propped up and put in a position to succeed is there. And so I just could not receive and not give back. My job is to, yes, to create a platform and a stage, but it's also to bring people who have had it worse than me, who don't have what I have, who aren't as articulate, who weren't able to go get a master's degree, whose children aren't thriving. Those people are just as deserving and worthy as I am. And so my message is a message of like redemption. And so this work is really about not just redeeming me, but everybody who has experienced anything similar to what I have experienced, because the world so often writes us off. And I just have to remember Hebrews 13:3 that says, remember those who are in prison just as if you were bound with them.
That's right.
You know, and so I try to live out what I was taught. We stray. I was raised right, and and life came at me fast. And so I have to remind myself and all victims and all people who have survived that we are resilient, y'all. Unnecessarily so, but not just are we resilient, that we survived to tell the story. You can judge my decisions, but I lived. And so many other people did it. And so for me, it's turning that pain that you might have about any situation. And how do you turn that pain into passion? And how you turn that passion into policy? Because it's not just enough to have a passion. It's not enough to have pain. If it doesn't equal out to concretized material conditions changing for my people, then it's not worth it.
Jewel, tell me your name again.
Michelle.
Michelle, then Ms. Edwards.
Okay. Hey, Joel.
I'm like devil's advocate a little bit with this question.
Sure.
Feel a controversy, but
Okay.
I know that like North Carolina is pretty much it's swinging, but it's like kind of a Republican state. There's a lot of Republicans and stuff, and most of them are pro-choice. And I know that
Wait a minute.
there's a lot of people that
You mean pro-life?
Right.
I'm sorry.
I was trying to say, we wouldn't even be here.
So yeah, it's right. So yeah,
Just kidding.
I know a lot of them are like pro-life, and it's a lot of like people like protesting out, in certain spots and stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like I might have to help or get help from the wrong side, or not the wrong side, but some side you might not agree with.
Mhm.
Did you ever like get in contact with some people like that to help you the bill? Because
Definitely. So I told you the picture of the most racist sheriff.
yeah,
Like we had to literally, we had to call all 100 sheriffs in order to get their support. The Sheriff's Association, so y'all might not know, but the Sheriff's Association is like North Carolina is unique in that we have these special interest lobbying groups, this conference of DAs, which is all the DAs, and then you have the sheriffs, and it's really crazy because they play this game of interfering with the laws that they directly benefit from, right? So you got DAs, for example, we wanted to raise the age in North Carolina for juveniles to be from 6, right? So we didn't want 6-year-olds to be caught up in the system. So we said, well, we think we should raise the age to 12. That 12 is the minimum age that you can be like put into juvenile proceedings. The conference of DA said, no, we know some 8-year-olds that's dangerous. What? So they are ensuring that they still stay relevant and having cases to prosecute by interfering in the system. So yes, we oftentimes have to talk to Republicans. The ACLU is a nonpartisan organization. We don't care if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent. We just want you to do the right thing, right? And so what we know historically is that none of the parties has done anything for Black, brown, and poor people. And we have not seen the material conditions of Black, brown, and poor people change despite the legislation, despite the voting, despite the marching, right? And so we know that this continued engagement and truth-telling and being unapologetic about what is happening from the Black experience is important, but we go right to Republicans. Brent Jackson out of what county is Brent Jackson? That's my good friend. When I see him at the legislature, I'm gonna talk to him. Not really my good friend, but I'm gonna talk to him when I see him. I chase Mark Robinson down. We have to have a conversation. I need to know, do you really feel like this? Or are you cool? Like, what's going on? Are you shucking and is this how you feel? Or are you playing? Because I needed to know, because I couldn't really tell if he was playing a role. And so I needed to look in his face. I needed him to tell me, this is how I really feel. And that's how he really feels.
Give us context.
Mark Robinson is the lieutenant governor. He's a Black man, lieutenant governor. He's out here espousing all this white supremacy, doing all the work of white supremacy on behalf of white supremacy as a Black man. Yes, that is.
Impressed by the character, you'll never be fooled by what they say.
Listen.
All right, Mr. Mayor, you go on now. We got rules.
Yes, ma'am.
Michelle?
Thank you again for sharing your personal story.
Yes, ma'am.
Truly a very brave thing.
Thank you.
Are you, I am the grandmother of two very preemie grandsons, but they're 19 now.
Yes.
Are you aware of any organizations that try to mirror you? And if so, what happens to that?
I don't know if you mean.
When I say mirror, what I mean is we know the ACLU
Mm-hmm.
and what you are doing.
Mhm.
Is there anybody else that's on your coattails?
Oh, like, yes, I would say Sister Song. We have Battle, Black Abortion Defense League, especially as it relates to reproductive justice. I would say those would be our partners. Planned Parenthood, of course, around reproductive justice. If you're talking about the criminal legal system, there's Forward Justice, the North Carolina Second Chance Alliance, Community Success Initiative. We work in coalition at the ACLU. But when we're lobbying, the ACLU oftentimes, because of our resources, are oftentimes some of the only ones in that building in a sustained way. So the legislature, y'all, we're in a long session. So on odd years, it's a long session. Short years is a short session. But really, North Carolina is all a long session because they can't agree on nothing, and so they just keep gaveling in, right? So we are there. I go up on Monday nights, but because of today, I'm going this afternoon. But it's usually we're there Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and then we come home on Fridays. And so that's a sustained effort for many, many months. Sometimes the meetings go way into the nighttime. They do all kind of crazy stuff, calling votes. I don't know if you've watched the news lately. They just changed the rules. And so now these rules is bad, y'all. Y'all saw Kevin McCarthy, how he gave in to the folks in D.C. on them bad rules. Well, here in North Carolina, they ain't have to go through all of that because Speaker Tim Moore wrote the rules and he was already a shoo-in. And so the rules now are there's no notice need for a vote to go to the floor. It used to be a 48-hour notice, no notice now. They can call a vote at any time. In North Carolina right now, there's a supermajority in the Senate, and we only have one seat in the House that is able to sustain the governor's veto. And that seat is sometimes, depending on the issue, some weak seats, right? And so what we're going to see is a huge fight at the legislature this year on all of our main issues, which, just so you know, voting ID is probably going to be a thing, y'all. More than likely. We're going to try to hold a line, but they probably don't require voting ID to vote. We know that they're going to try to force the sheriffs to work with ICE so that immigrant communities are disproportionately impacted and deported. But let me just be clear, Black people in the room, that is not Latinx people. Black people of any country of origin are deported at the highest rates of any other group of people. So no matter where Black people come from, Cameroon, Haiti, it don't matter. Black people are going to be deported more than anybody. We know that they're going to do a 13-week ban on abortion. So right now we have 20 weeks. They're going to take it back to 13 weeks. And we know that there are two Democrats here in North Carolina that are weak. Garland Pierce out of Scotland County and Ray, his last name is Representative Ray, he represents Halifax, Northampton, up near the Virginia border. Those are going to be the fights that we have, in addition to the plethora of expanding the long arm of the law into Black and brown communities by trying to criminalize every single activity that is present and apparent in Black and brown communities right now. So we have a real fight on our hands. But there are other groups. Disability rights is oftentimes in the building. They do a lot of work around. We can expect that critical race theory is going to be under attack, as well as LGBTQIA students. And let me just be clear, it's not a moral issue. It's an issue about our children being able to show up and be children and learn in ways in which they see fit. And any encumbrance to that is dangerous to all of us. Do not get caught up in the labels. Get caught up in what the outcome is. The outcome is that if any group experiences a diminishment of their civil rights and civil liberties, that means that we are all at risk for our civil rights and civil liberties being diminished. I think, Ms. Walton.
Ms. Walton.
Yes, I wanted to ask, can you just tell us a little bit more about your home and education journey?
Oh, sure. So I grew up Nation Sport Road, Winsong Trails, Exit 4 for show. The day I die, that's my place, that's my hood, I love it. I was raised by a white father and a black mother. My parents are from South Carolina. My dad was from York. My mother was from Chester. They met as pioneers, missionaries in their church together. And my dad came from Vietnam. He was raised, by a racist family for the most part. But going to Vietnam pretty much changed his perspective on people. He always knew that that Black people were subjugated and should not be, but because of he being raised by his grandparents, he wasn't really able to voice that. But when he got older, he decided he was going to do what he needed to do. So my parents got married right after Loving versus Virginia, when the Supreme Court allowed interracial couples to get married. But the Klan came several occasions. My dad, being a white person, full of privilege, was like, I'm not leaving. And they burned a cross in their yard. The sheriff came, encouraged them to move. And my dad still was like, no. But then my mother was pregnant with my brother and with hand claim again. And she was like, we need to move. And so they moved to Charlotte right over here. I was just telling Robert, they moved off of Drummond Avenue. And then they moved to Windsong and raised us. I went to Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools. I went to Central Piedmont. Shout out to Central Piedmont Community College. When I came home, I told y'all I had the twins March 23rd. I've entered school in that summer. I didn't have very much clean time. I was really trying to get the probation officer off my back because they was getting my nerves so bad. For real, they was really getting my nerves. And so I was like, well, if I go to school, maybe them people leave me alone. Good gracious. So I go to school and I'm really raw because now I've been walking the streets and, life has been kind of difficult. And I come into Central Piedmont just raw. And I decided that I wanted to learn what was wrong with me. So I'm going to go for substance abuse. And the staff at Central Piedmont, God bless all their souls, they work with me. They work with me. They work with me. They made me feel a part of and that I belong. And they helped normalize that what I had experienced was normal, that people who experience poverty and addiction, this is often your experience, that you're not alone. And through their love, I was able to grow and decide to go on to get a bachelor's degree. Then I decided to go on and get a master's degree. I thought that my career would be in helping people working in direct services, but it was in working with men who were convicted of domestic violence in several counties across the state that I realized that, I've been shot, I've been stabbed, all the things that can happen, right? Like, we won't be laughing, but it's true, all the bad stuff, right? All the bad things that can happen to a person. And it just hit me one day when I was sitting in this group with these men who had engaged in these really violent behaviors. As I was looking at them and I was listening to them, they were no different than me, y'all. We all had issues. And yes, I had bore the brunt of that violence, but that was violence was a weight that they carried too. And it became important for me to try to understand them in the context of human behavior, not just what we learn about domestic violence, because a lot of what we learn is from white researchers, from a white context, through a white lens, who ain't never had their ass beat, excuse my language. You know what I'm saying? And so what we don't, the people who have been most impacted aren't in the room. They're not telling the story. And I was in the room with the people, myself, other people who were most impacted. And it hit me that this system is creating violence. We're sustaining and maintaining and perpetuating violence through this system. So it became important for me to unpack that. And in that unpacking, that's how I ended up at the ACLU, because it gave me the biggest platform to work on policy. Because not that policy is the end all be all. We want to abolish this carceral state, right? But until we get to a more just system, we have to work on what we currently have. People say, you think people should be free, Kristie. I do, but that doesn't mean I don't ignore the people who are still inside of the prison. I still have to work on both ends. So yes, I believe that we should be working toward a more just system, but until that day happens, we have to fix the system, attempt to fix and mitigate some of the harm that this system is causing right now. And so a lot of our work at the ACLU is around harm reduction, because we recognize that laws are not always going to get us where we need to be, because slavery was legal. The Holocaust, y'all, was legal. So when we talk about what's legal, we have to think about what's moral, what's ethical, and what's right, because what's legal ain't always any of those things.
I got a question.
Yes.
So in your eyes, if without just overall abolishment, what would a more ethical, give me some things that you would prioritize in the current carceral system that we have that should be implemented.
So number one, the things we asked Governor Cooper for, y'all, just so y'all know. So every year we sit out in front of the governor's house, me, Miss Tina, everybody. We sit out in front of the governor's house for over 30 days demanding that he let our people go. And so we've gotten about 20-something people who free, right? Who otherwise would not have released. These are people who have been convicted of very heinous things, people who have engaged in a lot of harm, but we believe in the redemptive quality. And so what we are saying is that punishment, surveillance, and control does not equal safety. Despite the investment in policing and police, your doors don't stay locked up. They don't stay open at night, do they? Why not?
Say it again.
Despite the investment in police and policing and surveillance and control, you still don't have safety because you got to lock your car, you got to lock your doors at night. Where's the safety that's supposed to be occurring? If jails and prisons were a deterrent for crime, why we still got crime? It's not working. We have to look at social, political, and economic issues through a social, political, and economic lens. But right now, we are just punishing those issues. And so what I'm suggesting is that we move away from punishment and punitiveness and move towards resources, because we have enough abundance in the community to give people what they need. If we stop buying tanks, if we stop buying chemical munitions, me and 300 other people were caught downtown in 2020 and almost killed by CMPD for protesting George Floyd's death. Again, Andrew Brown was killed, shot 4 times in the back of the head in Elizabeth City by the sheriff's department there. I have a jury trial coming up this year. The state is doing more to hold me accountable for standing in solidarity with Andrew Brown than the people who murdered him. And so when you look at it through those lenses, what is right, what is just, it is divesting from a system of punishment and investing in a system of care, community care. We keep us safe is something that we chanted all the time when we're in the streets. We keep us safe. Y'all saw we had jail support that was down there. Gary didn't like that jail support, but it was there for over 100 days, 24 hours a day, providing services to people in real time, food, bus passes, phones, clothing, whatever they needed. They got it at that one-stop shop. And that was 100% by the people, for the people. And what happened? All of those volunteers were arrested en masse for providing care. And so what we have done is criminalize care and concern and popularize punishment and disconnection and disappearance. You have to ask yourself, why do they want to disconnect and disappear Black and brown people? Because there's a monetary element that we have failed to discuss today. It pays to lock people up. You as a taxpayer pay $200 a day for the people who, per person, who are incarcerated in Mecklenburg County Jail. That's about $300,000 a day that taxpayers pay to keep people locked up. Now, what if that same money was invested into housing? We saw where they took Tent City and just moved those people to hotels. The city got more land, more anything than anybody. Charlotte, with all the billions of dollars, the Michael Marcicanos, the Brian Colliers, the Hugh McCalls, we got more than enough to fix it. But why won't they? Because in order to have extreme wealth, you have to have an underclass of people who are in a constant state of subjugation. And the best way to keep people subjugated and commodified is in an incarcerated state. So that's why you see an overinvestment in police and policing, and you don't see that same amount of investment in Spencer Merriweather's court system, because they want you to have 5 and 6 years before your trial, where you sit in that jail and don't have due process, don't have speedy trial. So it is rigged, y'all. And it's not rigged like covertly. This is an overt rigging. And we all are complicit and complacent with, because we don't do oftentimes the things that are necessary, not just to call it out, but to knock it down. It's not enough to call it out. We also have to be simultaneously willing to knock it down.
Mr. Gary Manning.
Thank you. I commend you. Proud to the people. You mentioned economics.
Mm-hmm.
Policing. Police were invented to catch slaves.
Yes.
Nothing has changed. We vote every year. Ancestors didn't die for us to have the right to vote. They did not. Economics. Vote once a year. Nothing changes. If we collectively, as a people, black, white, brown, yellow, green, stayed home one day, didn't go to work, didn't shop white, didn't ride the public transportation. Last boycott was in 1959, over 1 year, Montgomery bus boycott. We didn't watch TV, didn't go to work. Doesn't cost anything, stay home. System will be shut down. Then we can sit and talk. That's how I feel.
I agree. I mean, you got my vote. I'm ready to stay home for 2 days.
We can't continue to live in fear.
2
We live in
days.
fear
I gotta do
as a
one.
people. Thank you very much.
You have any other questions?
Well, if no more questions, let me put out an invitation. So next week, the legislature officially gavels in on the 25th. If at any point you are interested in coming, please hit my inbox, email me. We have resources available. We can get you there. And you can come talk to legislators here, Mecklenburg County legislators if you want to, how to find them. And then any other legislature that you would feel comfortable talking to. We really do enjoy people being in the building, not just enjoy it, we welcome it because it really does put legislators on a different, you just see them performing differently. It's different when I talk to them, but if I bring somebody, a constituent from Charlotte, a constituent, they act totally different. And it's really good to see them kind of wiggle and squirm because they are used to making other people wiggle and squirm. And so when you come as a constituent and you know your stuff, you know how they voted, you got hard-hitting questions, it really does change the game. And so we invite you all to come at any time.
I do have a question. What was your bill? Why did it have no Mecklenburg County support?
I don't know. I'm not saying it didn't, they weren't primary sponsors. So they may, you can have primary sponsors and then it might be 100 sponsors under there. But the primary sponsors of the bill, it was strategy, just to be quite honest. So I'm a strategist, y'all. I used to scheme and scam on how to get money. So now I use those same skills on how to get things done at the legislature. It works. I'm telling you, the stuff works. Like I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. We knock on people's doors. That's why I have no problem going to talk to them people. How you doing today? My name is Kristie. I'm telling you, life trains you for what you're supposed to be doing. So for me, it's a strategy. You have to look at who is going to be supportive. Kristen Baker was important. She was Republican. She was important because she's also an MD and she's a woman. And so a woman doctor talking to men, Republican men with the same values, that was important. But we also had Dr. Carrie Ann Crockett, whose patient died. She's a doctor out of Greenville. Her patient's baby died while shackled. And she is convinced that the shackling delayed the labor. She called all 100 sheriffs herself. And so it was easy for them to try to, blow me to the side. But she was a doctor. And so and men, just be real honest, men don't feel comfortable debating issues of reproduction, period, but they definitely don't feel comfortable debating with the doctor. And so she was able to muscle them to a yes very quickly. And I'm gonna tell you what our real plan was if they said no. They won't act right. We was going to their wives and their daughters saying, do you know that your husband believes that pregnant women should be shackled, should be separated from their children? So we were gonna go to their families and really put that pressure on them. Because what we know, y'all, if we didn't learn anything from Dr. King and his letters from the Birmingham jail, that you're going to get criticisms for your bold action. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that you're bold. And so you have to do what you need to do. And if that means we call 100 sheriffs, that means we go to their wives and we go to their church. Those are the type of things that have to happen. Yes, direct action is a thing. It's a necessary part of the movement. Without direct action, we would not see what we have today. We would not see the Montgomery bus boycott was a direct action. And now we have desegregated buses. And so you have to you might think of when you see people in the street, you might think, well, what are they doing that for? Understand that is a necessary tension in order for change to occur. It just can't be negative tension.
So what were the adversarial viewpoints? Like, what were they saying that, why shouldn't that happen?
That why shouldn't they? Why should they shackle?
Yeah, like,
For
what,
safety, staff safety. Are you kidding? These pregnant women are dangerous. They are dangerous. And our staff safety, we take staff safety, 100%. Plus, it was also about cost. So you have to think about if we're mandating the type of care a person receives and the regular amount of care when you have not had to provide any care. And now you have to provide a specific kind of care. The sheriffs in those smaller counties don't get to buy those toys now. They have to actually spend that money on incarcerated people from their budget. Those are it's economic reasons.
Yeah. But
Terry Johnson, which county was
He's
he?
Alamance County.
Alamance County. And did you find that is it all over North Carolina, these sheriffs, these 100 counties, or a certain segment of North Carolina
No.
where they conjugate and plan to work against us?
Oh yeah, so the Sheriff's Association is just designed just for that.
Okay.
That the Sheriff's Association is a lobbying arm. Basically, they lobby on behalf of the sheriffs. It's like as if the sheriffs are a group that has rights. But anyway, now the sheriffs, just so you know, a sheriff's power is guaranteed by the Constitution. Yeah. So a duly elected sheriff's power is guaranteed by the Constitution. So they already have an inordinate amount of power that is entrenched within the Constitution. Why do they need a whole organization to lobby on their behalf? It's because they want to maintain the ability to keep Black, brown, and poor people in the poorest conditions as possible while they maintain the order and control and increase their budgets and get a new jail. You'll see smaller counties saying we need a new jail. And so they need to justify that new jail. They have to justify it through growth. And so right now in the prisons in North Carolina, we have about 29,000 people incarcerated in North Carolina. They estimate that in 2029, there will be 39,000 people. So we'll see, over 10 years, we'll see 1,000 bodies added on to the prison population each year. And that's going to start, though, in the jails. And what we're really going to see is, during the pandemic, trials were put on hold. Lots of cases didn't get heard. So there was a backlog of 2 to 3 years for murder cases here in Mecklenburg County prior to the pandemic. That backlog is up to about 5 or 6 years now. So you have jails that are full of people either waiting pretrial or they're going to take it to trial and get found, maybe guilty or not. But the majority of them will take a plea deal just so they can move through the process and not be held in limbo. And so that is going to be a huge issue moving forward from my perspective.
Okay, in Mecklenburg County, we are one of the largest counties in the state of North Carolina. And we have our sheriff.
Yes.
He's been in for a while. Tell us some positives about our sheriff.
Oh,
in
yeah.
Mecklenburg County.
Okay, I could say lots of good and all kinds of things about Gary. So I'm gonna stay with the good. I have a good relationship with Gary, I would say. I can call him and ask him about his policies. He's very transparent as far as his policies. He is always a thought partner. He does not always say things the right way, but neither do I. So I really appreciate his irreverence to the power structure and he is probably the biggest critic of the Sheriff's Association. He is, because he knows how much they block progress. He sees now how much they align with the white power structure and try to keep Black and brown and minority and women sheriffs subjugated and off to the side and disempowered. And so Gary does a lot, I would say, just outside of Mecklenburg County on the state level to coordinate with other sheriffs who are like-minded, who don't believe in the punitive nature of being a jailer, I would say. Also, he's done a lot to ensure that people who are experiencing crisis have better mental health care. I had a pregnant woman who wanted to nurse her baby. He made it possible for her to figure out how to pump that milk and get that milk stored, which you would think would be a thing, right? Like pregnant people store milk. They had never had the request. And so we were able to work with him. She couldn't get an electric pump. She had the hand express, but she was able to pump their milk. So Gary's always been, if you approach him with something, from my perspective, he's always been approachable. he doesn't always do what you want him to do, but I don't expect any elected officials to do everything I want them to do, because I'm always, and if they do exactly what I want them to do, guess what? I'm asking them to do something else tomorrow. So like, you know what I mean? Like, we're gonna always be pushing. Like Governor Cooper, we tell him every year, thank you, but you didn't do enough. And he be doing as much as he think he can. And so like, we hope that we can continue to expand on our advocacy by pushing on Gary. Gary is not the worst of the sheriffs. There are other sheriffs in more progressive cities, Durham, that are worse. Wake County was horrible with Gerald Baker. Wake County had a really horrible jail conditions. And Wake County justice system, just in general, we get compared to Wake a lot. I would tell you that Wake County is much more punitive, much harsher than Mecklenburg County ever will be. So don't get locked up at Wake.
Ms. Walton has a question.
Yes.
Chris.
I don't have a question, but can I make a short comment? A girlfriend of mine's grandson was accused and arrested 5 years ago for murder. And he was innocent. His case was just dismissed in no doubt.
See, told you. Well, so my timeline was right, 5-6 years. I know.
They paid for a good attorney,
And he was innocent.
innocent, 5 years.
And so let me just say, now,
He was in jail at the time.
Oh, in
yeah,
jail.
he was pre-trial at the time. So let me just say this. I get a report that shows me the length of time people have been incarcerated. Spencer Merriweather probably is tired of me asking him, well, when they going to trial? Well, what day is this? Because, you know, I look at the amount of days. When I see 1,400 days, a person's got 1,400 days, that means, let me tell you what that means, y'all. Now, a prison, you get to go outside. Jail, ain't no outside. Because if you at the Mecklenburg County Jail, when you go to court, you under the tunnel going to court. When you go to rec, you in the room that's got a little fresh air coming. So that means never vitamin D, no sunlight, no feet on solid ground. You know how people talk about grounding? You cannot ground yourself inside of a carceral space in Mecklenburg County Jail. And so 5 years is just abhorrent. And for it to be dismissed and to have no legal recourse, because who can he sue? What can he do? What can he do? He's lost 5 years of his life. I mean, I ain't gonna say he can't sue. He probably could. But just still, even that, entering into that process is long. Litigation is long, it's arduous, and it puts you in a system that is equally disparate towards Black plaintiffs as Black defendants.
Chris.
Yes.
How can we find out about the resources for like mental health crisis?
Here in Mecklenburg County. So I would want to say that our LME is still not partners. Is it partners? Cardinal. It's not Cardinal anymore. They got rid of Cardinal. So there's a 1-888 number. What is it now? I can't remember anymore because they got rid of it. But every county has a 24-hour 1-800 number where you can call and speak to a licensed clinician 24 hours a day. And that clinician can, at that point, walk you through sets of questions, and then they can recommend resources. And so the state has what they call IPRS funding, which is state-funded mental health care. So if a person doesn't have any Medicaid, no Medicare, no insurance, the state still does have mental health funding for folks without any. So just because a person doesn't have insurance, health insurance, does not mean that they cannot receive treatment.
Steve Smith's new clinic, right?
Steve Smith's clinic. Also, I want to say has free mental health care as well. And, you know,
On demand too.
and also Novant and CMC, y'all. Like, I mean, not CMC, Atrium. Novant and Atrium also are really good resources. They each have psychiatric floors. There's out there on Billingsley, Lord, Billingsley is a resource, but there are lots of mobile crises. So now I know that Chief Johnny Jennings is working to make sure that when there's a mental health call, that there are officers who are trained in mental health and also counselors actively going out to the call. So there are lots of various resources around mental health, but as far as inside of the system, it's not, healthcare is not good.
We gotta be out of this room by 10, but I see Ms. Walton has a question. If you have a question.
No, Alliance Health.
Alliance Health, that's it. Thank y'all.
Well, with that said, guys, please give a round of applause. Moses.
You
Ms.
so
Kristie
crazy.
Puckett-Williams, thank you so much for your
Thank y'all for having me.
Does anybody